Hi everyone, this is Mr. Trio, and today's presentation is about tackling paper number 4. As a reminder, there are 3 components which make up the assessment for the IGCSE history program, and paper number 4 is the last one that we need to discuss. Let's go into some of the details. Paper number 4, or also known as component number 4, is a 1-hour examination, opposed to both paper number 1 and paper number 2, which are 2 hours long. One of the nice things about paper number 4 is that you as the student get to choose which question you answer. The format of paper number 4 is what is known as an extended essay. And what I mean by extended essay is that in order to receive high marks, you need to present a paper which has a very clear introduction, clear evidence, sometimes included multiple paragraphs, and then have a clear conclusion. The other aspect that's important to understand is that paper number 4 tends to deal with questions which are opinion-based. What I mean by opinion-based is that it will ask you a question, you need to respond, and it's not so important what your response is, meaning there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, but it's more important to be able to support your opinion with evidence. Last but not least, the focus of paper number 4 is entirely the depth studies. In our class, we have focused on World War I, and we have also focused a little on Germany. And when we get a little later on in this presentation, I'll explain why that is a more competitive advantage. As a reminder, there are many different subjects which make up the depth studies, from the first one, World War I, to Germany, to the United States, to China, Russia, South Africa. And one of the reasons why I always recommend for students to try to focus on at least 2 of these, although you're only required to do 1, is that because you, the student, get to choose what the question is that you answer. If you have studied both A and B, then your chances of having a strong essay go up. We will be using our history model, which we introduced in, I believe, paper number 1. And the whole idea behind the history model of the course is that it builds upon itself, starting with story, details, comparisons, analysis, and then finally the opinion, which is at the top. And as you may remember, the top is more complex than the bottom. Now, one of the things that's nice about the Cambridge program is that through the website, you can actually look at previous papers. So today, during this presentation, I'm going to give you 4 questions that were actually asked during a paper 4 examination to give you a sense of what types of questions are being asked. First of all, there were 2 questions that were asked about the First World War. How important to the failure of the Schlieffen Plan was Belgium's reaction to invasion? Explain your answer. And how significant was the Battle of the Somme to Britain? Explain your answer. In Depth Studies B, Germany, we have how important were the reparations as a cause of the problems of the Weimar government between 1919 and 1924? Explain your answer. And how significant was the war of 1939 to 45 in changing life in Nazi Germany? Explain your answer. Now, let me go back to something I mentioned a little earlier. If you are a student who has studied more than 1 depth studies, including the First World War and Germany, essentially you're in a position now to answer any of these 4 questions, and you only have to answer one. So essentially, if you know one of these topics better, then you can answer that one. Once again, if you've only studied one of the depth studies, then you have a 50-50 choice. You have question 1 or question 2, opposed to having more options with the more you study. Now, before we move on, as we look at these questions, what do you think is the most important word that helps to indicate what is an opinion? It's how important and how significant. We're going to talk about this during paper number 4 because this is at the heart of it what paper number 4 wants you to focus on. It wants you to answer this question, how important or how significant something is. Now, let's take a look at question number 3 and go through the process of trying to answer this question. Now, this video certainly does have historical content, but what I really want you to focus on for this video is really more the process versus the content. So much of the content that is in this video, historical content I should say, is really sort of wallpaper. We'll include the historical content, but what I want you to focus on is really the process in which I am using in order to answer the question for paper number 4. In this question, how important were the reparations as a cause of the problems in the Weimar government between 1919 and 1924? You need to establish what the baseline story is. That is the who, the what, and the when. Well, let's look at the question. Reparations are the what. It needs you to know what reparations are. Reparations, as you may remember, are payments or land which is given to the victor of a war. We're going to be focusing on problems. What were the problems? Hyperinflation and unemployment. And we also need to focus on the Weimar years in Germany. So if you were answering questions about Germany in the 1960s in your answer, you're off base. You need to always remember what is the question that's being asked and focus on that. And that really helps to establish the when. When is the question supposed to focus on? The years 1919 to 1924. And as a reminder, this is the period which is right after World War I. So that's the base story. What are some details? Once again, let's take a look at reparations. The reparations for Germany were large sums of money, the surrendering of coal areas, the Rhineland and the Saar are an example. What is it that we need to know about the details of the Weimar government? It was democratic, it was weak, and it was coalition government. And once again, 1919 to 1924, what's happening? This is the rise of extremist groups in Germany. Comparisons. Reparations. These reparations on Germany were very similar that were given to Russia during World War I. The Weimar government was very weak, opposed to the Kaiser and the nobles that had been very strong before the war. And 1919 to 1924, you can compare that the poor conditions are directly related to extremists and the rise of extremists. Now let's get to analysis. What can we say about reparations? As a judgment, we can say that they were very harsh. The Weimar government structure made conditions worse. And this period after World War I USA and others could have helped Germany more in order to lessen the problems that they had. One of the things that I would do before I start writing an essay is I would start to collect the facts, starting with the story, the details, the comparisons, and the analysis. And one of the things that is helpful is that sometimes it's very hard to just begin writing an essay. You need to organize your thoughts. And as I was going through this process in order to prepare for this video, one of the things that I noticed right away is that this section on comparisons, I don't need that at all because it really kind of takes away from the story. So you can push that to the side. Or in other words, if you organize your information before you start writing, it will make it a stronger essay. Now, last but not least, we need to get to the top of the pyramid in order to form our opinion. And the opinion is, what do you think? And as we mentioned earlier, what is the key word that helps us to understand what we think? And that is, how important. When we discussed paper number 1, question number C, we talked a lot about measurements. And in history, how do we create a measurement in order to determine how important something is or how significant it is? We looked at a lot of different models. We looked at questions that are asking you, do you agree with something? Is something is good or bad? Or the one at the bottom here is important, not important, or neutral. I like to think of scales often on a 5-point scale because you have right in the center that neutral response. On the far end, you have a very strong important, and on the far left, you have not important at all. When we look at this particular question, always remember to think about what is the question that is being asked. We are asked about reparations and how they relate to problems. If our response is going to be very important, then what you would expect to see is all the evidence in your essay proves that reparations were the problem. If you make the argument that reparations are not important, then all the evidence proves other reasons were the problem. Can you guess what a neutral response would be? That would be a balanced argument which shows that reparations were a problem, but there were other factors that were also involved. I think that with this type of question, one of the things that you'll find is that most of the time your question will be somewhere here in the middle, because what the essay is trying to get you to do is to provide that balanced argument. A little bit over here in which this issue is not important and this issue was. So you can demonstrate that you understand the two issues. Here is a sample of 3 topic sentences which would show these extremities. Reparations were a very important reason why Germany had so many problems between 1919 and 1923. Neutral, reparations were important in some ways and unimportant in other ways to the problems in Germany after the war. And not important, reparations were not an important reason why Germany had so many problems between 1919 and 1923. So we are ready now to get started on writing our essay. We've collected our evidence, and it's time to get into the introduction. Remember our old hamburger model in which you have an introduction, evidence, and conclusion? I'm going to use it again here in order to walk you through the process. With the introduction, remember we want to provide context to answer the question. we want to provide dates and main people that are involved in the story behind reparations and problems in Germany. And last but not least, we want to provide that topic sentence. And the topic sentence should have some kind of measurement answering the question, how important? Now, once again, this is a response that you would perhaps see to the question that we are talking about. The purpose of this video was really not to teach the history of what was happening in Germany, but really to focus on the process. Here in the first sentence, you are providing your context. At the conclusion of the First World War, here we are defining reparations. Here we are establishing what the problems are: hyperinflation, unemployment, and the rise of extremist groups. We are mentioning main people that are involved in this story, including Chancellor Ebert. And then at the end, we have our topic sentence. We've seen this before, but once again, reparations were important in some ways and unimportant in other ways to the problems in Germany after the war. This introduction incorporates the context of answering the story. It provides definitions to the main vocabulary words which are in the question, such as what are reparations? What were the problems? We're including a little bit about one of the characters that's a part of the story, and finally, what is our opinion? And that's our topic sentence. Now it's time to get into the evidence. That's illustrated by the two patties in the burger. I have two patties because essentially we're going to provide two forms of evidence. The first form of evidence is all about how reparations are part of the problem. And the other paragraph will focus on how there were other factors that led to the problems. Let's look at it in a side-by-side comparison. Paragraph 1, you're going to talk about reparations, how they do lead to problems. Paragraph 2, you're going to talk about how they're not a part of the problem. Once again, it's probably a good idea to use a scrap piece of paper to write down some of these ideas before you actually start writing the essay. One of the big problems is that reparations took away rich areas that had coal, and this forced the French to occupy some of the areas that had coal. Because their coal was being taken away, this made it difficult for them to pay reparations. So, in other words, Germany had to pay these large amounts of reparations, and at the same time, the conditions of the war took away the rich areas in which the money would have come from. It was sort of a double whammy problem for Germany after the First World War. Reparations also removed money from circulation, and that's one of the reasons that there was such terrible hyperinflation in Germany. And the reparations were humiliation for the German people, which really helped extremist groups like the fascists under Adolf Hitler to rise to power. Let's take a look at opposing evidence. The government in Germany was weak. There was a lack of international support. And other conditions after First World War included that Germany had to reduce the size of its military. The reduction in the military led to the lack of factory jobs to build airplanes and submarines and things like that. And that led to unemployment. One of the things that's nice about this side-by-side comparison is that there are 3 pieces of evidence on the left and 3 pieces of evidence on the right. That's a balanced argument, and that's why your topic sentence should reflect that reparations were part of the problem, but they weren't the only problem. Finally, with an extended essay, you have to have a conclusion, and the conclusion needs to reinforce what you said in your opinion. One of the things, and perhaps this is a little bit too much detail, but a perfect score on paper number 4 is 40 points. You get 25 marks for being able to show things like cause and consequence, change and continuity, and intention and motives. Most of this analytical information, which makes up your opinion, will be found in your introduction, because that is where you are stating your argument. You get 15 marks essentially for your recall, your organization, and your knowledge of facts and dates and things like that. Those are found in your paragraphs where you have your evidence of support. So think about how to write an effective essay by putting the focus, of course, in your argument, showing the historical analysis of the situation, and then by providing good pieces of evidence, you can combine those two aspects together in order to make a strong extended essay. Thanks so much for watching this video. Of course, we're going to talk about this a lot in class as well, but this video, its purpose is really to get you started to think about what is paper number 4 and what are the things that I need to think about before I start.